The year is 660 BC. A young messenger from Judah steps through the Mashki gate of Nineveh for the very first time. On either side of him stand the colossal Amasa statues. These are massive creatures with human heads, the bodies of bulls, and the wings of eagles. They stand 15 feet tall, carved out of solid stone, staring down at him with blank and ancient eyes. Before the young man even sees the city, the air hits him. He smells the thick incense from the temples and the scent of meat roasting in the market stalls. But beneath those smells is something else. It is a sharp, metallic scent, like old copper. It smells like blood that has been washed away many times but has never been fully cleaned from the stones. He walks down the long corridor toward the palace. The walls on both sides are covered in stone carvings. Every single panel tells a story of a military win. He slows down to look at one and recognizes the face of a man being skinned alive on the carved stone. He realizes it is someone from his own country. This city has 12 kilometers of walls and 15 gates. Its palace covers 30 acres, and it holds the largest library in the ancient world. It has gardens that people think might be the real hanging gardens of legend, and yet, on these same beautiful walls, the skins of conquered people are left to dry in the sun. But this city, which was the wealthiest and most terrifying place on earth, would be erased so completely that 200 years later, an entire Greek army would march right over its ruins and never even know it was there. What kind of city builds a library of 30,000 tablets and a torture system just as complex at the same time? And what kind of God forgives a place like this and then destroys it anyway? This is the true story of Nineveh, the cruelest city that ever existed, the site of the greatest revival ever seen, and the place of the most total judgment ever fulfilled. The ruins of Nineveh sit beneath the modern city of Mosul, Iraq, on the eastern bank of the Tigris River. The name of the city likely comes from the word for the goddess Ishtar. It was a city named after a pagan god, and it lived up to that name in ways that still bother historians today. The Bible calls it an exceedingly great city that took 3 days to walk across. For a long time, people who didn't believe the Bible said this was an exaggeration. However, modern archaeology has shown it was true. When you count the inner city, the large suburbs, and the farmland needed to feed over 100,000 people, the Bible was not exaggerating. It was being precise. Nineveh had twice the population of Babylon at its peak. After the death of King Sargon II on the battlefield, which the people saw as a punishment from the gods, King Sennacherib moved the capital to Nineveh. He began building what he called the palace without rival. This wasn't just a boast, it was a fact. The palace covered 30 acres, which is about the size of 23 football fields, and it had over 70 rooms. The hallways were lined with nearly 2 miles of stone carvings. Each panel showed a conquest, and each conquest showed the screaming faces of the people who lost. The defensive walls were 40 to 50 feet high and went around the city for 12 kilometers. Each of the 15 gates was guarded by those giant stone statues. But the skill of Nineveh went beyond just worn walls. Sennacherib built the oldest known aqueduct in history at a place called Jerwin. This was hundreds of years before Rome tried to do the same thing. He moved water 40 miles from the mountains through a system of canals that was very advanced. Archaeologists even found a 135-foot tunnel cut directly through a thick wall to bring the river into the heart of the city. This water was used for beautiful gardens, parks with exotic animals, and lush green spaces. Recent studies suggest these were actually the famous hanging gardens that people used to think were in Babylon. It was a man-made paradise built in the middle of a dry wasteland, and it was paid for by the suffering of other nations. Then there was the library. In a room near a large mound, a young scribe named Nabuzukabkimus sat on a stone bench. He held a damp clay tablet in his left hand and used a reed tool to press marks into the surface with his right. The room smelled like wet clay and lamp oil. All around him, shelves were stacked from floor to ceiling with over 30,000 tablets. These tablets held all the knowledge of the world at that time, including medical books, notes on the stars, and letters between kings. On the tablet he was holding was a story about a great flood that destroyed the earth and one man who built a boat to survive. This was the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was simply doing his job, copying a story that would shock the world when it was found again thousands of years later. He didn't know he was working in the intellectual center of the world, a city built by an empire that was currently trying to wipe out the nation where the original flood story came from. In the streets outside the library, the city was full of energy. Markets along the canals sold flatbreads with meat and vegetables. People sold roasted grasshoppers on sticks as a snack, and others sold grilled fish caught fresh from the river. Small round boats coated in waterproof tar moved through the canals carrying goods. People drank beer and red wine from fancy silver bowls. There were plays performed with acrobats and music. Children played a board game called the Game of 20 Squares. Poor people scratched the board into mud bricks with a nail, while the rich played with sets made of gold and ivory. You might start to like this city. You might like the gardens, the food, and the children playing. You might start to forget what paid for all of it. But remember the messenger from Judah standing in the palace hallway? He hasn't moved. The same hands that wrote the flood story on clay also skinned people alive and hung their skins on the city walls. This is the part people are often not ready for. The cruelty of Nineveh was not just one bad king or one mean commander. It was the law. It was organized, written down, and carved into stone for everyone to see. The Assyrians did not hide the terrible things they did. They used them as a weapon. Every skinned body was a message. Every pile of heads was a warning to every other king. The prophet Nahum called Nineveh the city of blood, full of lies and victims. This was not just an angry man talking, it was the truth. The records found in the ruins brag about these cruelties. They would cut off heads and pile them up outside the gates of conquered cities. They would line the roads to Nineveh with people on wooden stakes for miles. This meant anyone coming to the city had to walk through a path of the dead. They would skin people alive and stretch that skin over the walls of the person's own city. They forced nobles to grind the bones of their dead parents into powder to humiliate them. They tore out tongues and used metal rings to pull prisoners by their jaws. One king even bragged about cutting off body parts to show them to other lands as a lesson. And they were just as cruel to children, as the records show soldiers killing infants against stone walls. In 722 BC, Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. They didn't just win a war, they erased a nation. Imagine a mother in that country standing in her doorway. She hears the sound of Assyrian boots on the road. She has heard it before, but this time it sounds different. This time, the boots are stopping at every door. She looks at her 3 children, not knowing that in an hour, they will all be sent to different parts of the empire and she will never see them again. 10 tribes were scattered like seeds on rocks. This was meant to destroy them forever. She would spend the rest of her life listening for the footsteps of her children, but they would never come. You can see the mix of luxury and cruelty in one stone carving from the year 645 BC. At first, it looks like a peaceful scene. King Ashurbanipal and his queen are relaxing in a garden. There are vines and trees, and musicians are playing harps. Servants are fanning the royal couple and pouring wine. But if you look at the left side of the carving, hanging from a tree branch right in front of the king, is the severed head of a defeated enemy king. The head is rotting, and the mouth is open, while the music keeps playing. This was a celebration. During a religious festival, the king would even pour wine over that severed head as an offering. This was what victory looked like in Nineveh. This was a normal day. This is the world where God sent a man named Jonah. He was a prophet who was sent alone and unarmed with a message. God told him to go to Nineveh and preach against it because of its wickedness. Imagine being told to walk alone into a city that skins its enemies. Jonah ran the other way. He got on a ship to go as far from Nineveh as he could. He didn't run because he was a coward, he ran because of what he believed. He knew God was merciful and he didn't want these people to be forgiven. He felt they didn't deserve it after what they did to his people. But after being swallowed by a large fish and brought back, Jonah finally went to Nineveh. He told God that the reason he ran was because he knew God was gracious and slow to anger. Jonah didn't doubt God's power, he was afraid of God's mercy. He was sickened by the thought that God might forgive the people who butchered his nation. Jonah walked into the city, past the giant statues and the noisy markets. He didn't have an army or a letter of protection. He just walked and spoke. He said, "In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed." He said it in 5 simple words. He didn't offer hope or tell them how to be saved. He wanted the city to be destroyed. But the city believed him. This is one of the most amazing things in history. Everyone, from the richest person to the poorest prisoner, believed the message. They stopped eating and put on sackcloth. Even the king got up from his throne, tore his royal clothes, and sat in ashes. He put on the same rough cloth used to wrap dead bodies. The king ordered everyone to pray to God and give up their violence. He specifically mentioned the violence in their hands. In a city where everything was stolen by war, to stop eating was to stop taking what violence had provided. For a soldier who had killed many people, putting on sackcloth was a way of confessing his sins. He looked at his hands and saw ash instead of blood. The king even made the animals wear sackcloth and go without food. They hoped that maybe God would change his mind and be compassionate. And God saw what they did. He saw they were serious about stopping their violence. The Bible says God relented, which means he was moved with grief and chose to show mercy. He didn't destroy the city then. But it is very hard to believe that the people who hurt you most deserve mercy. 100 years passed. The change didn't last forever. Nineveh went back to its old ways. They went back to war and blood. The palace was rebuilt and filled with new carvings of destroyed nations. In 701 BC, they attacked the south and trapped the king of Judah. Sennacherib bragged about his power and carved his victories into the walls where he ate his dinner. He looked at the pain of others while he enjoyed his wine. But God was watching. For 100 years, he watched. The prophet Nahum wrote that while the Lord is slow to anger, he is also great in power and will not let the guilty go free. The patience that saved Nineveh before was now ending. Slow to anger does not mean God is never angry. When he looked at the city again and saw no sackcloth and no change, the end was decided. Nahum wrote a masterpiece about how the city would fall. He said God was against them. These were powerful words against an empire that had never lost a war. Nahum said the lion's den would be destroyed. The hunters would become the hunted. He told them that if the great city of Thebes in Egypt could fall, then Nineveh could fall too. Another prophet, Zephaniah, said Nineveh would become a dry desert where wild animals would live in the ruins of the palaces. People passing by would hiss and shake their fists at it. Nahum even described the final battle before it happened. He wrote about the sound of whips, the noise of chariot wheels, and the piles of dead bodies. In 612 BC, it all came true. The empire was weak from internal wars. A large army of Babylonians and other groups surrounded the city. A young soldier on the wall might have remembered the old stories about the day the city wore sackcloth, and he probably wished his people had listened. The spring rains were very heavy, and the river flooded. The water that once made the city a paradise now destroyed the walls. The mud bricks turned back into mud and the walls collapsed. The enemy rushed in through the gaps. The gates were forced open, and the city was set on fire. The tar used in buildings burned with hot, black smoke. The beautiful wood ceilings from Lebanon burned, and the scent filled the palace. The heat was so intense that the stone carvings cracked and shattered. The faces of the kings and the carvings of the garden party were destroyed. But in the library, that same fire baked the clay tablets, making them hard as rock and preserving them for us. The fire that ended the city is the reason we can read its story today. In the late 1980s, people digging in the ruins found the bones of the soldiers who died in that final fight, exactly where they fell. After the fire, there was only silence. The canals filled with dirt, and the river just kept flowing. The desert took the city back. In 401 BC, a Greek general walked right past the mounds of dirt and never knew what was hidden underneath. The palace without rival and the great library were buried in silence. Just as the prophets had said, the story of Nineveh is a stark reminder that no empire is too grand to fall and no heart is too hardened to change. It shows us a city that reached the very peak of human achievement in art, science, and wealth, yet collapsed because it built that success on a foundation of cruelty. Nineveh was given a rare second chance, a moment where an entire civilization stopped in its tracks to choose mercy over violence. But when that lesson was forgotten and the sackcloth was traded back for armor, the silence of the desert was the only thing left. It teaches us that power without compassion is temporary, and that the choices we make today determine the ruins others will walk over tomorrow. Take a moment to look at the violence in your own hands, the ways we treat those around us when we have the upper hand. Are you building a legacy of kindness, or are you constructing walls that will eventually crumble? Choose to lead with empathy and seek restoration before the 40 days run out. If this story of ancient justice and mercy moved you, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. We want to hear from you, so leave a comment below and let us know what part of Nineveh's story surprised you the most. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.